the New Point Comfort Historic Marker. We're just going to do a few things. Well, Commissioner Bill Truex is going to come up and say a few words, and then Mr. Jim Chrisman, and then we will go over and dedicate the marker carefully while obeying traffic laws, so that we are very careful with that. So, Commissioner Bill Truex.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here at another marker dedication. It's interesting to see how we can pull together and find a lot of history about this wonderful community, and we're trying to bring more and more of it to the public's attention. So, welcome to the New Point Comfort Historical Marker dedication. Late in 2004, Charlotte County Historical Marker Program was created. It recognizes historic resources, people, and events, areas of architecture, archaeology, Charlotte County history, and culture. The purpose? To increase public awareness, cultural heritage of our county, to encourage historic preservation, and to enhance enjoyment of the local historic sites for citizens and visitors. It promotes placement of historical markers and plaques, sites of historic and visual interest to visitors from near and far. Currently, we have 21 historical markers and 1 interpretive waterway sign. New Point Comfort Marker is the county's 22nd marker to be erected. Why? Well, it's important to recognize an area of West Charlotte County that often does not get the same attention as Englewood, Grove City, or Posita. And those of us that live here call this Englewood, pretty much all of it. But we do like to identify the historical sections and areas and why each area has its own history. It's important to recognize more of the county's history as we get overshadowed by Punta Gorda and Port Charlotte. 50% of the homes in New Point Comfort are at least 60 years old. It's important to recognize this historic marker, the physical landscape in the 21st century, given the marked change, Charlotte County has undergone in that time frame. The connection to the well-known families, individuals of Englewood, the Gottfrieds, Stanley Lamp, direct connection to the Bass Biological Laboratory, and the historic Cookie House. Text of the marker reads, 1891, Colonel James M. Lewis built a hunting lodge near here on Deer Creek and named it New Point Comfort after his boyhood home, Old Point Comfort in Virginia. In 1893, the Gottfried family from Milwaukee settled on Deer Creek, now named Godfrey Creek, and raised pineapples, cabbage, and celery. In 1919, Colonel Lewis bought all the land between Deer Creek and Rocky Creek, or Ainger Creek as we know, including a waterfront from the Grove City Land Company. He named the entire area New Point Comfort and platted it into lots. In 1924, A. Stanley Lamp, 1887 to 1960, bought all the unsold Lewis and Gottfried lots. A plat for New Point Comfort was recorded in 1925, and the area promoted as the largest point on Lemon Bay. This was the first subdivision platted in the Charlotte County side of Englewood, circa 1931. This side of Englewood. Circa 1931, the Bass Biological Laboratory was founded at New Point Comfort by John F. Bass, Jr. to furnish research facilities to investigators in biological fields. The first full-time marine station on the Florida mainland and the laboratory remained in operation until 1944. Today, New Point Comfort is a quiet residential neighborhood, as we all know. It contains the largest number of historic buildings in Englewood. And this site, the last remaining Lamp lot, was donated to Charlotte County in March of 2023 by Stanley Lamp's nephew, James Chrisman, to commemorate the area's rich history. I think it's important, again, to identify that there's more effort being put into finding the historic places of West Charlotte County and what it means. For those of us who have been around a while, we do know that the various areas and some of the history in each of one of those areas. The people who love the community, we refer to all of it as Englewood, but again, each segment, whether it's Placida, Rotunda, Grove City, New Point Comfort area, or what have you, has its own history. El Jabin is another place. So I thank you for being here today, and with that, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Truex. And for our next speaker, Mr. Jim Chrisman, I just want to provide a little bit of an introduction. Jim very kindly approached Charlotte County, along with the staff at the Englewood Museum, to put up this marker. And they did all of the research. Jim very kindly not only donated the plot of land where the marker sits, he also very generously funded the marker as well. So Charlotte County Libraries and History is very fortunate to have people like Jim, to have people like the staff from the Englewood Museum who care about this history, who want to promote this history, and make it possible for us to be here today. So, Jim.
Mr. Truex, you've ruined my speech.
My apologies, sir.
I am definitely going to have to check my internet connection because I have got a security protocol somewhere that's gone wrong. I hope you'll bear with me because I can't fake it from this point forward. Good afternoon. On behalf of my family and friends, I'd like to thank you for coming out this afternoon and participating in the dedication of this historic marker. I'd also like to acknowledge the Charlotte County Commission and the Charlotte County Historical Society for accepting this site for its historic designation. Additionally, I want to add a special thanks to Ms. Betty Nugent, curator of the Englewood Museum and longtime friend. It was through her encouragement that I initiated this undertaking. I'd also like to thank Mr. Don Bailey and Mrs. Donna Stockstill for their collaborative effort in compiling the necessary documentation for submission of the application. I was planning to introduce my family, but I think that they got the wrong GPS coordinates. But I do have with me today my stepson, Vince Vance, who's operating a video camera for me. And I thought his wife was coming. I was going to introduce her also. But their son, Mackenzie, is pursuing a career in the motion picture industry in Los Angeles, so obviously he couldn't make it today. I can't account for the rest of my family. And I do have a very special friend from Sarasota, Marilyn Gergen. On July 4th, 1939, Lou Gehrig, the famous Iron Horse first baseman of the New York Yankees, stood in Yankee Stadium before a crowd of 61,808 fans giving his farewell address. And here's his famous quote: "Today I consider myself the luckiest man on the face of the earth. Well, today I stand before you, and I hadn't planned on the microphone, but I'm really thankful for it. And we're a few people short of 61,000, and I sincerely hope that this isn't my farewell address." But I make that same proclamation. I consider myself to be the luckiest man on the face of the earth. Luckiest perhaps isn't the most appropriate word. Maybe it's fortunate. Fortunate because I was given the second set of parents and blessed with the opportunity that few children of today have. I grew up in Englewood, Florida. In 1950, my brother and I got off a bus from Norwood, Ohio, and took up residency at 1998 Placida Road, just less than a mile from here. This was the home of my uncle, A. Stanley Lamp, and his wife, Ruth. Aunt Ruth was my mother, Grace Chrisman's sister, and this would be my home for the next 13 years. During that first summer in Englewood, I found that I was a constant companion of Uncle Stanley, and as a young child, I guess I was easily impressed by his many talents. I felt that there was nothing that he could not do. He even built our new homestead, a series of duplexes that we needed because of the expansion of his family. Later in life, I have found myself from time to time saying, "Yeah, I can do that. I'm from Englewood." One of his many talents was laying concrete block, and occasionally I was allowed to assist by supplying the mortar from the concrete mixer to the mudboard. I was mistakenly convinced that I was laying block, and that proved out many years later. I had to rebuild a concrete seawall and had successfully poured the footer. But as I began to set the block, I found that every time that I buttered a joint and turned the block to set it, the mud would fall off. Obviously, I hadn't completely learned the trade. Uncle Stanley was also a boat builder. He, like his other brothers, had experience as a commercial fisherman and was capable of building boats. And over the course of my lifetime, I probably had not less than 4. One of them that he built, actually it was my first, I used on this very canal. Back in the 1950s, there used to be a 1-lane bridge that connected Lemon Bay Road east to west, right about where the marker is positioned. And to the right, where Inglewood Merchants Plaza is located, there was a very large lagoon. I felt as though that I owned Lemon Bay from the big bridge to Stump Pass. Another boat that he built had 3 major revisions over its lifetime. The initial design was a tunnel or pontoon type hull and was constructed out of plywood and then fiberglass. It was powered by a twin-cylinder Onan engine which was mounted on a platform and equipped with an airplane propeller. That's right, it was an airboat of sorts. It didn't take long for Aunt Ruth to decide the airboat wasn't going to happen. And the propeller went away, the tower came down, and the engine was remounted as an inboard. Just one quick story on that vessel. I've always had a prejudice towards Johnson and Evinrude until Yamaha came along. Somehow we bought a Mercury. It was one of those red engine cowlings, about 6.5 horsepower. I spent more time cranking to start it than underway. One day when I was very near the mouth of Stump Pass and there was an outgoing tide, well, I hauled in my anchor, which was 10 feet of rope attached to a concrete block, and in typical fashion, I managed to flood the engine and it would not start. There's a lesson coming up. 10 feet of anchor rope and 12 feet of water will only slow your drift to sea. It doesn't stop it. Fortunately, I got rescued, but unfortunately, the news of the incident reached home before I did. There was a lesson to be learned, and rather than breaking out the strap, I got the lecture. Don't get me wrong, I received a hide panning on more than one occasion, but when there was an opportunity to learn something that would possibly be valued later in life, this was the answer that Uncle Stanley chose. He taught me to be a man. If Uncle Stanley had a leisure activity, I would have to say it was his cow pasture. He owned about 460 acres just north of what is now the Walmart store on McCall Road. And he eventually converted his herd into registered Aberdeen Angus, which he was very proud of. The cow pasture brought about a number of opportunities for me also, because that's where I learned to hunt, and it was a great place for the Boy Scouts to have many camping activities. At age 50, Uncle Stanley completed his first solo flight at the Venice Airport and obtained a private pilot's license. Stanley was a land developer, and over his lifetime he platted many subdivisions in both Sarasota and the Charlotte County portions of Inglewood. And this is where Commissioner Truax and I's presentation collide, so bear with me. In 1921, Charlotte County was created after many years of its citizenry pushing DeSoto County for a divide, and Punta Gorda became the county seat. As indicated on the marker, in 1891, Colonel James Lewis built a hunting lodge here on Deer Creek and named it New Point Comfort, after his boyhood home of Old Point Comfort, Virginia. In 1893, the Godfrey family, originally from Austria, settled on Deer Creek, which is now named for them, and they raised pineapple and cabbage on the land that borders the present-day New Point Comfort and State Road 776. In 1919, Colonel Lewis bought the remaining land between Deer Creek and Rocky Creek, including the waterfront at its south end. And in 1924, Stanley Lamp bought all of the unsold property from Lewis and Godfrey. He platted a new subdivision, and it was recorded in 1925, thus creating the first subdivision platted in the Charlotte County portion of Inglewood. And that subdivision is known as New Point Comfort. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim. And before we move over to unveil the marker, which we will do very carefully since we have to cross Lemon Bay Road, Just once again, I want to extend a special thank you to the Inglewood Museum, particularly Betty, Don, and Donna, for the research that they did. This research, it doesn't just benefit, you know, the end result is not just this marker. The end result is also that we now have a compilation of information on New Point Comfort that we can then share with the public as well. So that's fantastic. Again, another thank you to Jim for sponsoring the marker, for driving this forward, and to extending that history here that we have in West County. And finally, a thank you to the Historical Advisory Committee, chaired by Ms. Diane Munson right there. Thank you so much for coming out, who helps to spearhead the historical marker program and approves all the markers as well.